everyone, welcome to another modern deck tech. Alright, today I'll be deck teching Izzet Wizards. So when Demi-Lich was spoiled, well, everyone kind of lost their mind. Well, not initially, and then they lost their mind maybe 12 hours later. Demi-Lich is a pretty cool card. When I saw it and I saw it was a skeleton wizard, I'm like, okay, great, wizard theme. We can maybe build a wizard tribal deck or some sort of wizard aggro deck. So I started brewing a bit, and people have definitely tried. I came up with this Izzet Wizards list, which I've been having a lot of fun with, I have to say. Basically playing 12 bolts, which we'll get to in a second. But yeah, pretty fun little deck. You're sticking to the wizards creature type, and just kind of making sure you finish off the game as quickly as possible with playing as many lightning bolts as possible. It's kind of a simple concept. Before we get into the core, just a quick little plug here. If you want to support me on Patreon, check out the Patreon link in the description of this video. My Patreon is basically set up in a way where you get patron rewards at the end of every year. You get one non-bulk rare mythic for every month that you're a patron, up to 24 months in accumulation. So if you're a patron for 2-3 years, every year you get 24 rares and mythics. And each rare mythic is worth between $3 and $15, average around 5-6. So you're making your money back plus. That's basically how it's set up. Anyway, check out my Patreon to find out more. Alright, the core. Well, the core is the creatures. I'm playing 12 of them. And you're looking at them right here. Well, technically 3. So Soulscar Mage is a human wizard. So that, checked the box, essentially. It also checked the box of seeing any form of modern play. And Soulscar Mage is definitely not a creature to scoff at. It's nice. It has prowess, which is great. I mean, most of the creatures here have prowess, apart from Demi-Lich. Or Demi-Leech. However you want to say it. I don't think there's really a wrong way. So Soulscar Mage doing the good, turn 1 play job. Usually eating a bolt, which is fine. Because most people think you're playing a prowess deck, so that's usually what ends up happening with Soulscar Mage, and I'm okay with that. If it survives, you could start attacking with it, putting pressure, which is what you want to do. Stormchaser Mage is not a card I get to play with often, and usually it's hard to justify it, but here it's totally justified because, again, I want to stick to wizard creatures only, and Stormchaser Mage was, well, one of the best I can pick from of the modern legal wizards that, has any form of play in the current meta. I was really impressed with Stormchaser Mage. I mean, listen, once it gets out of bolt range, which is just one non-creature cast, it starts to become a big problem for your opponents. The fact that it's in the air, the fact that it has haste, meaning even in late game, it can come down and start doing damage immediately, potentially ending the game out of nowhere. So Stormchaser Mage actually did pretty well, performed really well in this deck. So Demi-Lich. Okay. So Demi-Lich is cool. After playing a lot of games with this list and kind of seeing what Demi-Lich has to do, or Demi-Lich has to offer, I should say, I'm underwhelmed. And I think probably the Demi-Lich decks in the meta kind of say the same story. So although the card is great, when it comes into play and when it starts attacking, assuming it survives the attack, you get to essentially copy a spell in your graveyard, which is cool. Apart from that, it's a 4/3. And the fact is that it dies really quickly. Your opponents are almost certainly going to remove it immediately. So that was my biggest issue with Demi-Lich, is that it fails to launch quite often. So I built the deck in a way where it's not completely all in on Demi-Lich. So if you don't get to cast it or resolve it or it survives, it's okay. You could put on pressure with your 2 other creatures and your 12 bolts. But of course, if you do get to land Demi-Lich and get to attack with it, which I did do a fair bit of time, well, then that's great, because you get to start casting your lightning bolts from your graveyard, or basically anything you want from your graveyard, and that's just great. The fact that it has its cost reduction ability on it is also cool, but again, I'm not necessarily building the deck to power Demi-Lich out as quickly as possible. There are some cards there to accelerate it, but I didn't want to rely too much on it, because if you did, then this deck would be far worse than it is. Alright, so that's the core. Let's check out the cantrips. Playing quite a few cantrips. Sleight of Hand, playing 4 of those. I didn't want to play Serum Visions in a deck like this. I feel like Sleight of Hand is just more of what I want to do. I don't want to necessarily set up my next few turns. Here I just want to have an option between 2 cards and get to what I need to as quickly as possible. So Sleight of Hand over Serum Visions. Chart of Course, also a card where you don't necessarily have to cast it after you've attacked. It's perfectly fine sometimes to just draw 2 cards and maybe discard a land card that you've overdrawn on, and that's great. It works really well there, because sometimes I just like getting the prowess trigger. Why not? If the prowess trigger is not necessary, of course, well then wait after your attack and then get 2 cards for 2 mana, which is not that common in Modern. So I played 3 of those. Expressive Iteration does a pretty good job here of, you know, getting your lightning bolts and whatever you need. You definitely want to cast a turn 3+, not necessarily turn 2, because it's kind of a waste. So yeah, I mean, Expressive Iteration did a really good job, performed really well, and again, helps you ramp up when you need to. And when you don't need to ramp up, well, then you at least just get whatever spells you need. You get 2 spells that should be really easy to cast that turn, and you're ready to go. Manamorphose is really the only accelerant, in quotation marks, that I'm playing in this deck to help you cast Demi-Lich, you know, as quickly as possible, or as early as possible. I'm not playing, you know, Mutagenic Growth or Gut Shot or anything like that. Manamorphose is the only free spell, quote unquote, that I'm playing to potentially help out Demi-Lich, but I just like it as, you know, it's a cantrip at the end of the day. It is free. You could cast it and cast 2 burn spells on top of it and just deal a ton of damage. And that's perfectly fine, perfectly legitimate, and does a really good job there. So even if you're not playing Demi-Lich, you're just playing, I don't know, Snapcaster Mage, it works really good. Light up the stage. Playing 3 of these. Obviously, ideally, you're casting it for its spectacle cost, unless you're, you know, flooded in mana, then pay full cost by all means. What I like about this is, again, it's basically a cantrip. You're looking at top 2 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. Sorry, you're exiling the top 2 cards of your library until the end of your next turn. You may play those cards. Again, in a deck like this, it's great. Hopefully you're looking at 2 burn spells or maybe a creature spell that you can, you know, build up your board with or just kill your opponent with. That's exactly what you want to be doing here with Light Up the Stage. Similar effect to Expressive Iteration, but you have a bit more flexibility. Really like it here. Really works really well. And you are dealing damage almost every turn in this deck, so you get to cast for spectacle quite often. The removal is kind of fun here. So you are playing 12 bolts plus 2 bolt storms. Let's just call it Thunderous Wrath that. So you're playing 4 lightning bolt. You're playing 4 Skewer to Critics, which is basically lightning bolt if you get to cast for its spectacle cost. So you know you could cast bolt and then cast Skewer to Critics for 2 mana, dealing 6 damage, which is just beautiful. Wizard's Lightning as well here. I mean, all your creatures are wizards, so long as you have one of them on the battlefield, you get to cast Wizard's Lightning for 1 red, which is again another lightning bolt to any target. So you are essentially playing 12 lightning bolts in this deck, which is just beautiful. Thunderous Wrath, it's more cute than anything else. I just like it because, you know, for 1 red, you get to deal 5 damage to creature or player, and that's just perfectly fine. Although I do have this theory, something is up with the MTGO shuffler, because all of a sudden, this miracle card, which you definitely don't want in your opening hand, and I'm only playing 2 of, always shows up in my opening hand. Without fail, game 1, first 7 cards, Thunderous Wrath has been almost without fail. All the games I played, this was there, so either I was extremely lucky or something's up with the MTGO shuffler. Anyway, discussion for another day. The lands, nothing too crazy here. 2 Steam Vents, 2 Spirebluff Canals, 2 Fiery Islets, 4 Scalding Tarns, 4... So I'm being a bit more heavy here on the fetches, but you don't have to be. You could cut the Misties and just play more dual lands like Spirebluff Canal or Fiery Islets. It's really up to you, but I like playing more fetches just to get all the colors I need as quickly as possible. Then 1 mountain and 2 islands. I was happy with this land. This land base didn't hurt me too much. The sideboard. Well, the sideboard was kind of weird. So I'm playing 3 Blood Moon, which you can play really well in this deck. Definitely a card you want to lean on heavy for a lot of matches. And you'll be seeing the matches today. Won quite a few games just off the back of Blood Moon, which is beautiful when you're playing a blue-red deck. Cleansing Wildfire, just adding to the land hate here. You know, against your Tron decks, your Amulet decks, whatever it may be. Even just 3 color decks, you know, being able to cut them off the land is really nice, or a specific color is really nice. And being able to draw off of Cleansing Wildfire is also important. If you don't want to be too heavy on, you know, land destruction, you could obviously get rid of Cleansing Wildfire. Kozilek's Return here. You're seeing a lot of white decks right now. You're seeing a lot of protection from red abilities floating. So Kozilek's Return here is a nice way to get around that. Duel with creatures is a nice sweeper, and most of your all of your creatures are going to basically dodge this, so they won't be killed off by the 2 damages being dealt to them. A Braid for your artifact removal, and more if you really need more creature removal. Well, it also deals 3 damage to a creature. Reality Shift here, mostly coming in for creatures that are just too big, too out of reach for your burn spells. So Reality Shift would be a nice option there. It's a card I really lean on. I really like a lot. Fluster Storm, playing 1 of here. This is just kind of random, coming in for Storm decks or some other types of decks where this might come in handy. I'm only playing one of, though. It's not necessarily a huge part of this deck. I'm not really playing any permission at all here. This deck is really much all in aggro, aggro, aggro. That's what you want to do. So Flusterstorm is just a one of. I would bring in certain matchups. Soul Guide Lantern to deal with graveyard strategies. Yeah, simple as that. I don't think I need to explain Soul Guide Lantern anymore. Alright, the matchup. So, I mean, let me just preface this by saying this is obviously not the strongest deck you could be playing in Modern. This is a fun deck that you could be playing in Modern. You may catch your opponents off... Well, you will catch your opponents off guard, that's for sure. And like I said, you're playing 12 Lightning Bolts. You'll see it in the matches today. That ends games really quickly, sometimes even quicker than burn decks, which is always nice. So, you know, saying that, combo. So, combo decks. Well, if you're playing a spell-based combo, it's going to be tough. Any kind of combo deck actually is going to be tough with this deck because you really don't have any kind of permission package. What you do have in the sideboard is your land hate, and that's basically going to be your best friend for most of the combo decks out there. Just cutting them off colors. I don't know how I wanted to say that, but cutting off their colors is basically the best thing you want to be doing. You know, Blood Moon plus Cleansing Wildfire is going to do amazing things for you, and that's basically your best bet. Storm is probably not going to be your very good matchup unless you manage to just keep killing their accelerants, but even then, eventually they're going to get you, so you got to make sure you're putting enough pressure on your opponent. So combo decks are going to be a bit tricky to deal with. Again, if you're playing against Amulet Titan, Living End, stuff like that, just lean on Blood Moon and you'll be okay. Other aggro decks. So you are playing a lot of removal in the main, which will come in handy. It doesn't mean that aggro decks are going to be easy, though. You are going to be dealing with a lot of creatures as well. A lot of other aggro strategies go really wide, a lot wider than you. Again, you're only playing 3 creatures and 12 total. So if you're playing against Lord of Atlantis. Well, if you are playing Lord of Atlantis decks, or Merfolk decks, I should say, Goblins, or any kind of aggro deck, that's going to be tricky. A lot of your burn is going to be going to creatures, not to your opponent's face. But again, that does mean that you have some play here. It means you could keep the board clean if you need to, and, you know, finish off your opponent once you've exhausted them of their creatures. Control decks. Control is going to be tough. You don't play that many creatures, so this is going to be an issue. You're going to have to work around their removal. You're going to have to work around their permission. Control's not going to be your best matchup here. What is nice is that you can overload them with a lot of removal spells, a lot of burn spells, I should say. So just again, have to sequence accordingly. You might want to, you know, wait until you have enough mana to be able to cast a few spells in the same turn to get around permission. But Control is definitely going to be a rough matchup because they're in it for the long game, and you're going to have issues in the long game. Mid-range decks. So mid-range decks. I would say 50-50. Again, what's really nice about mid-range decks, even the 2 colored ones, is that Blood Moon can deal quite a bit of a slowdown to them. Blood Moon, Cleansing Wildfire, you name it. You adjust your sideboard accordingly. In the main board, you have your creatures. They have flying, which will get around a lot of your opponent's creatures, and you have a lot of removal, a lot of burn. Same strategy in every matchup that you're going to have. So hopefully they don't draw into too many of their removal spells, and you draw into a lot of your burn spells, and just basically good to go. You're going to want to bring in artifact removal, obviously, for all the Stoneblade decks. Tron's going to be okay, I think, especially after game 1 when you can bring in all the land hate, Blood Moon, Cleansing Wildfire. That's basically going to turn them off. It's going to make you, it's going to give you time to maybe recoup if Karn resolved or something like that. If they're playing Wormcoil Engine, bring in Reality Shift or whatever other removal you've brought in for big creatures. Apart from that, though, you can end the games pretty quickly. And yeah, just focus on dealing that aggro. That's what you want to be doing. Last but not least, last and least, borderline Magic decks. So, Mill, Dredge, whatever it is. Lantern, if you do end up playing a Lantern deck, it's okay. You do have a lot of removal, so they don't really care about Ensnaring Bridge. Just keep hitting them in their face, and eventually they'll die. For mill decks, again, you have a lot of removal, so as long as they don't mill you really quick, a couple of creatures on the battlefield, and you're probably good to go. Dredge decks, whatever. Just say a prayer and flip a coin. That's basically what's going to happen. And that's basically it for Izzet Wizards. I have 4 matches, I believe, going up today. So stay tuned for those if you want to see some gameplay with this deck. Again, the deck was fun. I wanted to build a Wizards deck. I'm always honest with the decks that I deck tech to you. It is not the strongest deck out there, but if you have all the pieces or most of the pieces, I think it's a fun deck for you to at least try out. I had a lot of fun with it. I'll probably come back to it again. It probably needs a bit more refinement. That's definitely for sure, which is why I want to come back to it eventually, maybe in a few months. But again, I think it's something that you could definitely try out. And let me know in the comment section down below what changes you would make, because I'm genuinely curious, because I would probably steal your idea in the future and pass it off as my own. That's what I always do. Alright, thanks. If you enjoyed this video, please comment. If you enjoyed this video, of course, yes, please, hit the like button. If you enjoy my content in general, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, follow me on Twitter, Facebook, share my content on social media, watch it start to finish like you're doing right now. All that stuff really goes a long way and it really helps me out a lot, so thank you. If you want to support me on Patreon, like I said at the beginning of this video, check out the link in the description of this video, check out the Patreon rewards program. I set up to be generous. It sounds good to be true, but it isn't. It is just good. It's just me getting, money to have content on this channel and then thanking you by giving me your money back, plus more, plus interest basically. So check it out. Thanks and have a good one.